Great Molasses Flood, Boston. The tank belonged to the United States Industrial Alcohol Company. It had been built quickly in 1915, during World War I, when demand for industrial alcohol was soaring. Molasses was used to produce munitions. Speed mattered more than precision. The tank was never properly pressure tested. Witnesses later testified that it groaned on warm days. Rivets popped, the walls visibly bulged, just like your mum. Workers reportedly complained, but production continued. And here's where it gets worse. On the day of the disaster, a fresh shipment of warm molasses had just been pumped in. That warmer liquid likely accelerated fermentation inside the tank, increasing internal gas pressure. Think about that for a second. 2 million gallons, warming, expanding, contained by a structure already leaking. At 12:30 p.m., it failed catastrophically. The wave wasn't smooth. It was thick, dark, and violent. Rescuers struggled because molasses behaves strangely under force. It can move like water at first, then seize like cement. People were pulled from debris coated head to toe. Horses had to be shot where they were stuck. The cleanup required salt water from the harbor to thin the syrup enough to remove it. Even decades later, locals claimed that on hot days, you could still smell faint sweetness in the streets. Subscribe to ChronoVault. In the 1950s and 60s, Soviet planners had a vision: transform Central Asia into a cotton powerhouse. Cotton was called white gold. To achieve that, rivers feeding the Aral Sea were diverted into massive irrigation canals, some stretching hundreds of miles. On paper, it worked. Cotton yields increased, production soared. The problem? The Aral Sea had no outflow. It depended entirely on those rivers. As water stopped arriving, evaporation did the rest. By the 1980s, the shoreline had receded miles from former ports. Fishing towns like Moynac were left stranded in sand. Ships rusted where waves once crashed. And as the water evaporated, it left behind concentrated salts and agricultural chemicals that had run off from cotton fields. Windstorms carried that toxic dust across nearby communities. Mortality rates rose. Respiratory illnesses surged. Entire regional weather patterns shifted because the sea no longer moderated temperature. By the time the scale was undeniable, it was too late. It vanished. Just like your dad. Subscribe to ChronoVault. The London Beer Flood. The Moo Brewery specialized in porter, a dark, heavy beer stored in enormous wooden vats bound by iron hoops. These vats weren't small containers. They were industrial monuments, some nearly 22 feet tall. The snapped iron hoop that triggered the collapse had shown signs of stress before. Workers notified management, but hoop failures were reportedly common. They were replaced, eventually. An hour after the initial failure, the full vat ruptured. The explosion was powerful enough to knock down the brick wall of the brewery. The surge poured into the surrounding slum neighborhood of St. Giles, one of the poorest districts in London. Homes were small and fragile. The wave tore through basement dwellings where entire families lived in single rooms. One mother and daughter were reportedly having tea when the wall collapsed inward. Afterward, crowds gathered. Some even attempted to collect the beer from gutters. There were reports of people becoming intoxicated from the flood itself. And yet, legally, the event was ruled an accident beyond human control. The brewery survived financially. The victims did not, drowned in beer. Be careful what you wish for. Subscribe to ChronoVault. Australia. Thomas Austin's estate release in 1859 wasn't the first introduction of rabbits to Australia, but it was the one that detonated. Australia's environment was perfect for them. Mild winters, abundant grazing land. No natural predators adapted to hunt them effectively. Rabbits reproduce rapidly. A single pair can produce dozens of offspring in a year. Within 50 years, they had spread across the continent. Farmers described land stripped to bare dirt. Native species, including small marsupials, were pushed to extinction as competition intensified. The rabbit-proof fence, completed in 1907, stretched over 1,100 miles. It was one of the longest continuous barriers ever built. Maintenance was constant. Inspection teams rode its length to patch holes. The rabbits crossed anyway. Later attempts to introduce the myxoma virus reduced populations temporarily, but survivors developed resistance. Nature adjusted. Again. Moral of the story: rabbits are horny. Subscribe to ChronoVault. The Chernobyl disaster. The test conducted that night was supposed to answer a simple question. If power was lost, could the spinning turbine generate enough residual energy to bridge the gap until backup generators activated? To conduct the test, operators disabled key safety systems. That alone was risky, but compounding errors followed. Reactor design flaws, particularly the RBMK reactor's positive void coefficient, made it unstable at low power levels. When operators attempted to regain control, they triggered a massive power spike instead. Control rods were inserted, but due to their graphite tips, they initially increased reactivity. Seconds later, the reactor exploded. The blast blew a 2,000-ton lid off the reactor core. Firefighters arrived unaware they were fighting a nuclear fire. Many received lethal radiation doses within hours. Pripyat's residents were told evacuation would last 3 days. They left belongings behind. They never returned. Just like your dad. Today, wildlife thrives inside the exclusion zone. Wolves, deer, even wild horses. Nature reclaimed the city. Not because it forgave, but because it doesn't need permission. Subscribe to ChronoVault. Ambition builds civilization. But history suggests something consistent. Control is often temporary. Pressure builds slowly. Systems drift. Warnings feel manageable, until they aren't. And when nature responds, it doesn't raise its voice. It just removes the illusion. Subscribe to ChronoVault, because sometimes the most dangerous force in history is confidence. But don't let that stop you from subscribing. That kind of confidence is good. Subscribing confidence is good. The other kind is the bad kind. Subscribe to ChronoVault with confidence.